You have a deadline. You know you have a deadline. You have known about it for weeks. And yet here you are, reorganizing your desk, checking your phone, making another cup of coffee, doing anything except the thing you are supposed to be doing. And then comes the familiar verdict. You tell yourself you are lazy. You have always been lazy. Other people do not struggle with this the way you do. There is something wrong with you. That verdict is wrong. And the science that disproves it is far stranger than you expect. Because procrastination is not a productivity problem. It is not a time management problem. It is not a character flaw or a moral failing or evidence of laziness. Procrastination, according to the researchers who have spent their careers studying it, is an emotion regulation problem. And that reframe changes everything. Dr. Fuchsia Sirois at the University of Sheffield has spent over 2 decades studying procrastination, and her conclusion is precise. Procrastination is not about avoiding the task. It is about avoiding the negative emotions associated with the task. Boredom, anxiety, self-doubt, frustration, resentment. The task itself is almost secondary. What you are actually running from is the feeling the task produces the moment you think about starting it. Your brain does not experience a difficult task and think, "This will take effort." It experiences a difficult task and thinks, "This feels bad." And your brain is extraordinarily good at finding ways to not feel bad right now, even at the cost of feeling much worse later. This is the core of procrastination, not laziness, emotional avoidance. And here is what makes it so hard to escape. The avoidance works. In the short term, completely. The moment you close the document, open a different tab, pick up your phone, the uncomfortable feeling disappears. Relief floods in. Your nervous system registers. That worked. Do it again next time. The avoidance is immediately rewarded, which means it is immediately reinforced, which means the next time the task appears, the pull toward avoidance is even stronger. You are not failing to work. You are succeeding at making yourself feel better right now. Your brain has simply learned an extremely effective short-term strategy that happens to be catastrophic in the long term. To understand why some people are more vulnerable to this than others, you need to understand something about how the brain evaluates the future. There is a phenomenon researchers call temporal discounting. The idea that the further away a reward or a consequence is in time, the less weight your brain gives it. A reward available right now feels enormously more valuable than the same reward available in 3 months. A consequence arriving next week feels far less threatening than a consequence arriving tonight. This is not irrationality. It is a feature of how human brains were built, in an environment where the future was genuinely uncertain and the present was all that could be reliably acted on. But in the modern world, this ancient calculation creates a specific trap. The bad feeling associated with starting a task is immediate. The reward for completing it is distant. So in the moment of decision, your brain is performing a calculation that systematically underweights the future and overweights the present. The discomfort of starting is real and now. The relief of finishing is abstract and later. And right now always wins. Dr. Piers Steele at the University of Calgary spent years building what he called the procrastination equation, a formula that attempts to quantify why people delay. His model showed that procrastination increases when the task has low expected value or success probability, when the reward for completion feels distant, and when the person has high sensitivity to the emotions triggered by the task. Crucially, Steele found that impulsivity, the tendency to be pulled toward immediate relief, was the single strongest predictor of chronic procrastination. Not laziness, not poor time management, impulsivity. The brain's tendency to wait right now more heavily than later. And here is where this becomes personal. Chronic procrastinators are not people who do not care about the future. Most of them care deeply. They can see the consequences coming. They understand the math. They know that what they are doing is irrational. And they do it anyway, because knowing and feeling are processed by different systems in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, reasoning, and long-term thinking, understands the future perfectly well. But the limbic system, the ancient, emotional, threat-sensitive part of the brain, is responding to the present moment. And in a conflict between reason and emotion, emotion usually wins. Not because people are weak, because that is how the brain is wired. There is another dimension to this that almost no one talks about: the relationship between procrastination and self-worth. Dr. Timothy Pychyl at Carleton University has argued that procrastination is fundamentally tied to identity. When a task feels threatening to your sense of who you are, when the possibility of doing it badly carries implications about your intelligence, your competence, your value as a person, the temptation to avoid it becomes almost irresistible. Because if you do not try, you cannot fail. And if you cannot fail, you cannot receive evidence that your deepest fears about yourself are true. This is why perfectionism and procrastination are so reliably linked. Perfectionists do not procrastinate because they are lazy. They procrastinate because trying and failing feels more catastrophic than not trying at all. The procrastination is a protective strategy, an unconscious hedge against a verdict they cannot bear to receive. And here is the cruelest part. The procrastination itself then becomes evidence for the thing they feared. You did not do it. You are incapable. You are lazy. The self-worth threat that caused the procrastination is now fed by the procrastination, in a loop that can last years, sometimes decades. The guilt and shame that follow procrastination are not motivators. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive finding in the entire field. Most people assume that feeling bad about their procrastination will motivate them to do better next time. The research consistently shows the opposite. Dr. Michael Wall at Carleton University conducted a study in which students who procrastinated on studying for an exam and then forgave themselves for it were significantly less likely to procrastinate on the next exam. The students who continued to feel guilty and self-critical were more likely to procrastinate again. The guilt was not a corrective. It was fuel for the next avoidance cycle. This makes sense when you return to the emotional model. If procrastination is driven by the need to avoid negative emotions, and guilt is a powerful negative emotion, then guilt about procrastination gives you another emotional state to avoid. You avoid the task to escape the anxiety it produces. Then you feel guilty for avoiding. Then you avoid the guilt. Then you feel more guilty. The shame spiral is itself a form of procrastination. So what does actually work? The first and most important shift is self-compassion. Not self-indulgence. Not lowering your standards. Self-compassion, treating yourself with the same reasonable kindness you would extend to another person who was struggling. Because you cannot use shame to motivate someone out of shame-driven avoidance. The math does not work. The second shift is task reframing. If procrastination is about the feeling a task produces, then changing how you feel about the task changes the likelihood you will start it. This is not positive thinking. It is a practical recognition that a task framed as threatening and ambiguous is far harder to start than a task framed as manageable and specific. Breaking a large task into the smallest possible first action, not writing a report but opening a document and writing one sentence, reduces the emotional cost of starting to near zero. The brain's threat response quiets when the task feels achievable rather than overwhelming. The third shift is environment design. Willpower is not a reliable resource. It depletes. It fails under stress, fatigue, and emotional load, exactly the conditions under which procrastination is most likely to occur. Removing the sources of easier emotional relief from your environment, the phone, the open browser tab, the comfortable alternative, reduces the competition for your attention before the emotional avoidance mechanism has a chance to activate. And the fourth shift is understanding that the feeling you are avoiding at the start of a task almost never materializes in the way you expect it to. The anticipation of discomfort is almost always worse than the discomfort itself. Researchers call this the empathy gap, the inability of your present self to accurately predict how your future self will feel once actually engaged with the task. Most people who manage to start a dreaded task report that within 5 to 10 minutes, the resistance largely dissolves. The dread was real. The task itself was manageable. You were not avoiding the task. You were avoiding a prediction about the task. And the prediction was wrong. Here is what procrastination is telling you, if you are willing to listen to it differently. It is not telling you that you are lazy. It is not telling you that you are broken. It is telling you that something about this task feels threatening. That you are carrying emotions about it that have not been acknowledged. That some part of you is afraid of failing, of judgment, of finding out something uncomfortable about what you are capable of. That is not a character flaw. That is a human nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting you from pain. The problem is that it is protecting you from pain that is not actually dangerous. And the cost of that protection is the life you are not building while you wait for the feeling to pass. The task is still there. It will always be there. And the version of you that sits down and starts it. Not because the fear is gone, but in spite of the fact that it is still present. That version of you is not more disciplined or more talented or more motivated than you are right now. That version just stopped waiting to feel ready. Because ready is not a feeling. It is a decision.